School, who's going to give the welcome remarks.
Welcome, good afternoon. Guest speaker, Professor Eduardo Bonilla Silva, Commissioner Rosemary Antoine, the Rapporteur on the rights of people of African descent and against racial discrimination, Commissioner Tracy Robinson, First Vice President of the Commission, Commissioner Rosa Maria Ortiz, Second Vice President, Commissioner Dinah Shelton, ex-President of the Commission, and Maestro Emilio Alvarez y Casa, Executive Secretary of the Commission, members of the Diplomatic Corps, OAS staffers, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all for coming to support the second lecture in the lecture series, Transforming the Invisible into the Visible. That this is an initiative of the Rapporteurship on the Rights of People of African Descent and Against Racial Discrimination, which is headed, as I said, by Commissioner Rosemary Antoine. I will leave Commissioner Antoine to elaborate on the nature and purpose of the lecture series. I would like to take a few minutes to place the work of the Rapporteurship within the larger institutional and historical framework of the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. Starting in 1990, the Inter-American Commission began creating thematic rapporteurships in order to devote attention to certain groups, communities, and peoples that are particularly at risk of human rights violations due to their state of vulnerability and the discrimination they have faced historically. The aim of creating thematic rapporteurship is to strengthen and promote and systematize the Inter-American Commission's own work on this issue. Currently, the Inter-American Commission has 10 thematic areas, most of which are headed by reporters. Apart from the Rapporteurship on the rights of people of African descent and against racial discrimination, the other thematic areas are the Rapporteurship on the rights of indigenous people, Rapporteurship on the rights of women, Rapporteurship on the rights of migrant workers and their families, a special Rapporteurship for freedom of expression, Rapporteurship on the rights of the child, Rapporteurship on human rights defenders, Rapporteurship on the rights of persons deprived of liberty, Unit on the rights of lesbian, gay, trans, bisexual, and intersex persons, and Unit on economic, social, and cultural rights, also headed by Commissioner Antoine. The Rapporteurship on the rights of people of African descent and against racial discrimination was established in February of 2005, with a mandate of dedicating itself to activities of stimulating, systematizing, reinforcing, and consolidating the action of the Inter-American Commission on the rights of people of African descent and racial discrimination. The Rapporteurship carries out its mandate primarily by preparing reports and special studies on the rights of Afrodescendants and more broadly studies on issues pertaining to elimination of racial discrimination, analyzing complaints of racism and racial discrimination received by the Commission and conveying of the Commission to the Commission its opinion and recommendations with regard to those complaints, making recommendations to the Commission regarding hearings to be granted during regular sessions, and participating with the Commission in hearings having to do with alleged violations, working with parties to achieve friendly settlements, undertaking consultations and preparing recommendations to member states regarding the modifications of existing laws related to the rights of Afrodescendants and on racial discrimination, drafting admissibility and merit reports as well as thematic and country reports. In support of its mandate, the Rapporteurship is also expected to work with the other Rapporteurships of the Commission in the matters that intersect with Afrodescendants and racial discrimination and their respective mandates. Focus on civil society with a view to amplifying regional awareness of the guarantees and mechanisms offered by the Inter-American human rights system for the protection of the rights of Afrodescendants and against racial discrimination. Maintain a database on the most current information received through its informal hemispheric network related to the rights of peoples of Afro-descendant and racial discrimination in member states of progress in this matter. Promote this system and, in particular, the work of the Rapporteurship through its participation in education and training activities, as well as seminars, conferences, fora, and among others. Collaborate with relevant United Nations bodies, including the Working Group of Afro-Descendants and the Special Rapporteur on Racial Discrimination. The Rapporteurship has carried out a number of important activities since establishment, one of which is the issuance of a thematic report, The Situation of People of African Descent in the Americas, published in December of 2011 and launched in St. Lucia in July 2012. The special report grounds several of the current activities of the Rapporteurship as driven by its work plan, given that the report highlighted the particular areas of concern in the quest to enhance the rights afforded to persons of African descent. The current lecture series is one such initiative, and the entire Commission is delighted that it's well underway. We regard it's an important contribution to the Rapporteurship's work and the broader human rights objectives of the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. Thanks a lot.
Excellencies of the Diplomatic Corps, President, fellow commissioners, Executive Secretariat, and all of you, as the Rapporteur for the Rights of Persons of African Descent and Against Race Discrimination, I just want to add my own words of welcome to you. I know you're all very busy, and this is lunchtime, so hopefully you're not hungry as well. And I thank you for demonstrating your commitment to this issue. We consider this lecture series, Transforming the Invisible into the Visible, to be a significant vehicle in addressing one of the most pressing issues highlighted in the Rapporteurship's report, as mentioned by the President. So it's especially for my colleague in the Rapporteurship, my sole colleague, who's the attorney Hilaire Sobers, who in fact promoted this initiative. We are very delighted to have you with us. Importantly, in that report, visibility is conceptualized not merely as support for peoples of African descent, but also, quote, to sensitize others regarding their contribution to the development of their own states. And so this report implores us to recognize the persistence of racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia, and related intolerance that specifically affect the Afro-descendant population. And it promotes strategies to eliminate these social scourges and violations of fundamental human rights. Since invisibility is such a key theme, and visibility is such an important tool to address the existing inequities, a lecture series is perhaps an obvious approach. So we launched this series last month with a presentation by the renowned cultural anthropologist and filmmaker, Professor Sheila Walker. Some of you were privileged to hear that. And today it is my pleasure to continue with the second installment of the series featuring just as distinguished Professor Eduardo Bonilla Silva, who will speak on the topic New Racism, New Racism, and the Post-Racial Movement in Urban America. When we launched the series a few weeks ago, I gave a full speech on the issue of invisibility, in particular the different layers of invisibility as they relate to race, and that is on the website, so there's no need for a full repeat. However, given the historical moment that we are in, I feel it is important, indeed it is my duty, to make a few brief but focused remarks on this issue once again. At the start of the lecture series, I made the observation that race is a subject on which everyone is eager to agree that it is wrong, etc., but few are willing to actively engage to further progress or even to debate the issues. A deafening silence. indeed sometimes a willful blindness. And I also noted that the inaugural lecture came at a very significant point when there were several issues that were emerging at that time. It was at that time the start, the same week in fact, of the Trayvon Martin trial, and which brought the whole issue of racial profiling, one of our important issues. Also that week, we saw the ruling on affirmative action, asserting the principle of strict scrutiny to be applied by the Supreme Court. And some may argue it was in some ways ignored because it wasn't fully developed, the dicta in that court. And it was also the week when we had launched the Convention Against Racism. And those were very rare opportunities for discussing this issue in a society and a region where it is difficult to hold these conversations in any sustained way. But at that time, like many others, I was very hopeful at that point in time. And now, coincidentally, this week again, we have had the decision in the Trayvon Martin case, which once again speaks directly to our topic. As rapporteur, I do not feel that it's appropriate for me to criticize or analyze the actual judgment in public, but a couple of observations about the process and the context of this important issue is perhaps pertinent. Although, of course, had this been any other country in the region, the Commission probably would have received a petition already or expected to challenge, either challenging the trial or the refusal to prosecute in the first instance, or at least the stand your ground law on the ground of human rights. Yet, interestingly, even if this case had been brought before the Commission, I suspect that the issue of race would have not been part of the portfolio, given, as I have repeatedly said, that race is the most under-reported and under-analyzed issue in the Commission. And we have dealt with relatively few cases on this subject. So to reiterate, race remains a subject that is consistently experienced, but hardly complained about formally within either domestic or international legal systems. And I have said that my rapporteurship regards this as one of the layers of invisibility, and we are actively engaged in bringing more light to this issue, particularly in relation to our petition system. And I'm sure, Professor, you would be giving us some of the reasons why we have this cloak of invisibility to this issue, and sometimes even a refusal to acknowledge issues of race in terms of, which we saw even in the Trayvon Martin matter. I found it noteworthy the length to which the legal system and some sectors of the public went to remove the issue of race. The judge, for example, objected to black juror selection in an attempt to prevent bias, determining that 6 white jurors, well, one I think may have been Hispanic, that 6 white jurors was neutral. The judge also ruled that the word profiling could be used, but not the term racial profiling. This is the context which I think promotes discussion as opposed to the actual judgment, of which I said I don't want to comment. There was also much public discussion about groups that always want to, quote, play the race card, as if to suggest that this was some sort of game and not a legitimate problem in either the justice system or the wider society, when in reality, there is ample concrete evidence of systematic patterns of rights violations based on race. For example, up to last night on CNN, it was reported that sentencing for blacks is 19.5% longer than for whites. And we know already, it's well documented, more persons of African descent are stopped, searched, arrested, and convicted. So I see the Trayvon Martin case, indeed, as a poignant example of the invisibility of race, particularly in the justice system, and indeed a symptom of the wider society. But I am hopeful because of the public outcry and outrage, and indeed the dialogue that has accompanied this decision. So it's a hopeful sign that we are ready to discuss these issues frankly. And so our lecture series is part of this ongoing dialogue. It matches to the Rapporteurship's broader objectives, such as our theme, access to justice. This was already one of our themes in our work plan, examining the dynamics of the realities as they relate to judicial guarantees and so on, racial profiling, etc. Some of the difficulties that persons of African descent continue to confront in the justice system, which are, of course, connected to persistent poverty, and persistent poverty having to do with, as our report suggests, well-documented structural paradigms of inequity related to Afro-descendants throughout the region. They are the ones in every country that are among the poorest, and denial of their rights, both civil and political, because there's a connection, and economic, social, and cultural, not to mention the social dynamics and stereotypes that are produced. So this whole notion of structural discrimination in the region and these inequities, I continue just to say that while racism is outlawed as a judicial construct in all of our legal system, there remains fairly strong structural paradigms that exacerbate inequality, including the fact that ownership of financial resources and economic resources still remain largely in hands that are not persons of African descent. So there are some common denominators. In the region, of course, and our larger concern is to continue to deconstruct invisibility. So Professor Bonilla's Silva's presence here today reminds us, sadly, too, that there's a geographical unity in these persisting themes of race, invisibility, and inequality, which no doubt he will place in better context for us, the Americas and beyond. And his topic, particularly his emphases on new racism and over America, jolts us out of our complacency and the mask with which we have cloaked the subject of race right from the beginning. And I think that there can be few who are better placed to address this subject. He is a professor of the chair of the sociology department at Duke University, and he has gained great visibility himself in the social sciences since 1997. His article in the American Sociological Review, Rethinking Racism Toward a Structural Interpretation, challenged social analysts to analyze racial matters from a structural perspective rather than from the sterile prejudice perspective. And he recently appeared on the PBS election special, Race 2012. Incidentally, voting patterns is also one of our concerns in Rapporteurship. His research has appeared in journals such as Sociological Inquiry, Racial and Ethnic Studies, Race and Society, Discourse and Society, American Sociological Review, Journal of Latin American Studies, Contemporary Sociology, Critical Sociology, Research in Politics and Society, the Annals of the American Academy of Political and Social Science, and Political Power and Social Theory, among others. He has published 5 books, namely White Supremacy and Racism in the Post-Civil Rights Era, which was co-winner of the 2002 Oliver Cox Award, given by the American Sociological Association. Racism Without Racists, that's an interesting one. Colorblind Racism and the Persistence of Racial Inequality in the United States, itself an award-winning book. And he has a long chapter examining the Obama phenomenon, which we're eager to hear about, Professor. White Out, the Continuing Significance of Racism, White Logic, White Methods, Racism and Social Science, another co-winner of an award, and in 2011, State of White Supremacy, Racism, Governance, and the United States. He has received many awards, as you would appreciate, most notably the 2007 Louis Koza Award, given by the Theory Section of the American Sociological Association for Theoretical Agenda Setting, and in 2011, the Cox Johnson Fraser Award, given by the American Sociological Association, quote, to an individual or individuals for their work in the intellectual traditions of the work of these 3 African-American scholars. So we are very privileged today to have him here with us. So please join me in giving him a very warm welcome.
Good afternoon. ¿En español o en inglés? Well, I wrote it in English, but maybe I'll say a few things in Spanish. So all of you know what the meaning of el descenso por la madriguera, down the rabbit hole. My favorite story as a child was Alice in Wonderland, but I could not have predicted that 50 plus years later, got to be honest, I would be revisiting the story again. Since 2008, Americans have been living in the upside-down world of Wonderland. They believed then, as did most people in the world, that electing a black man to the still very white White House meant America had finally become a post-racial nation. Thus, I'm here, much like Alice, a black Puerto Rican Alice, if you will, trying to tell you what time it is, trying to give you the tools to escape Wonderland America. To address the perplexing situation of contemporary America, that is, the existence of a tremendous level of racial inequality, while so many people believe racism has all but disappeared, will require me to do three things. First, explain how the collapse of Jim Crow did not mean the end of systemic racism, but led to the emergence of a new racial regime I labeled the new racism. Second, identify the new prejudice, the new racial ideology that organizes whites' racial views, and increasingly, unfortunately, the views of many non-whites. And I'm referring to the ideology I call colorblind racism. And lastly, I'll irritate some here by arguing that the election of Obama in 2008 and his re-election in 2012 did not represent a fundamental break with our racial history. Before I address my first point, describing the nature of the racial regime of contemporary America, I must begin with a fundamental theoretical claim, and an important one, because I think that we really cannot understand the racial transactions in contemporary America and perhaps in the world unless we understand the nature of racism. Racism is not about, well, it's partly about this, but I'm going to suggest that it's not the core of racism. So racism is not about the races, whether depicted as Klan members, neo-Nazis, Southerners, birders, or the infamous chef Paula Deen. Racism is a collective phenomenon based on the existence of a system of racial domination, a system of practices that reproduces racial domination, and we must fight the temptation to reduce the phenomenon to something that happens on the individual level, that is, to the races. In line with what I just said, people of color in the US are in a corner when talking about racism, as we can no longer say we routinely face the horrendous racial practices associated with slavery and Jim Crow. Hence, nowadays, whites tell us, come on, folks, slavery is long gone, so stop playing the race card. But there is an answer to this silly position. We must state vigorously that the end of Jim Crow did not mean the end of systemic racism. Instead, racial domination was re-articulated or reorganized in the late 1970s into a regime I labeled the new racism, the subtle and apparently beyond race character of most of the racial practices that reproduce racial inequality in contemporary America, arguably including elements of racial profiling, where you need not use the language of the past and can justify it by statistical reasoning. Yeah? I'm doing this because you guys are more likely to, therefore it's okay for me to do that. Let me give you a few specific examples of new racism practices. Because the practices associated with residential segregation in the past, things such as housing covenants, so in the US they used to have covenants saying you cannot rent or sell apartments or houses to blacks, Mexicans, Puerto Ricans, Jews, etc. Those practices became illegal, and the normative climate of what can be said about race matters in public has changed, one would expect that the level of residential segregation should have declined significantly. But that is not the case. Residential segregation today is almost as high as in the past. So how can this be? My answer, residential segregation is still a big problem today because discrimination in the housing and lending markets remains. Report after report document how little we have improved in this area and how new racism practices are behind our current levels of residential apartheid. For example, the authors of a recent report issued by the Civil Rights Project at Harvard titled More Than Money noted that, and I quote, affordability alone, that means money alone, cannot explain the existing pattern of segregation in Massachusetts, and added, the main reasons for continuing segregation include steering by realtors. So a realtor can basically take you and show you some units and not others, yeah? And unless you have evidence based on talking to other people, you may not even know they're showing you a limited segment of the housing market, yeah? So steering by realtors. Subprime loans, so since 2008 we learned that we, folks of color, got played, yeah? So we got the worst loans, but again, you don't know that unless you have all the data on loans, yeah? So subprime loans and a lack of action by the area cities and towns. In 2006, a report by the Fair Housing Center of Greater Boston indicated that their testers, so now we have data that we test, yeah? The HUD sends whites and non-whites, some Latinos and some African Americans, to test. And they match them by all characteristics but their race, ethnicity. Okay? So guess what is the finding? Their testers, their minority testers, have documented experiencing discrimination 45% of the time, and black testers 50%. The report also indicated that besides steering, that I mentioned before, by realtors, the exclusionary tactic most often used was providing differential information to minority applicants about the availability of housing units. Clever, no? Well, we don't have units available. We really like you, but the report told of one black tester who was advised that the apartments she had seen were not available until January 1st, while the white tester was told December 1st. Advantage white, 1 month. In another case, a Latino tester and a white tester both emailed an agent and left voice messages. The white tester received a return email including pictures of the available unit and made an appointment to see it. The Latino tester is still waiting for a response from the agent. Racial practices in housing and banking exemplify what I call this new style discrimination because they are hard to detect and even harder to label racial, unless one has the smoking gun. How can one prove discrimination by banks or realtors or renters? In the case of realtors and renters, we need a whistleblower telling us why folks are faking the racial funk. You can smile. Okay, you want to smile, that's good. Time does not allow me to go further, but similar practices have been documented in many other areas of life. And I want to give you a personal example that some of you may relate. So I'm a professor at Duke, but I navigate life as a black-looking person with a beautiful Puerto Rican accent. So I get the double whammy, yeah? And so I go now that I'm a professor to buy some nice clothes, you know, expensive stuff. But because I don't fit the part, yeah, I'm racially profiled, yeah? We all, black folks and Latino folks, are racially profiled, yeah? In many, many areas. So I go to a store and immediately, may I help you? Just looking. May I help you? As I told you a minute ago, you know. So now I go by the rule of two. The first time, very politely, just looking. Second time, you can help me. I'm trying to steal this fancy jacket. And I was wondering if you could give me, and I know it's discrimination, because if what is in the heart of the person is not race, the response should be like, huh? But they always tell me, it's not about that. I'm like, yes, it is. So I travel across the nation, and I have been told of other clever, seemingly non-racial strategies to accomplish the deal. And think about it. Can I go to a court of law and claim discrimination based on this clerk asked me 3 times, may I help you? And now we have data, and we know that the may I help you is a way of letting you know we're checking you out, yeah? Sometimes they do that. Sometimes they follow you to the store. And obviously, it's hard for you to then make a claim of, well, I was followed. I'm like, really? What kind of data you have that you were followed, yeah? Okay, so accordingly, given the character of contemporary discrimination, we, people of color, must bring along a white friend to go shopping, buy a car, get a loan, rent an apartment, buy a house, drive a car, walk in the streets, with or without Skittles, or, well, to do almost anything in America to prove discrimination. So that's the corner we are. Yeah? Second point. Alongside the new racism regime that I'm talking about, a more seemingly suave, strategic type of racial ideology emerged. I call it colorblind racism, and I call it because I live in Puerto Rico 21 years. So I learned about colorblind racism by living in Puerto Rico, okay? So we claim to be racially innocent, come on. Okay, and that ideology that I navigated in Puerto Rico, when I came to the US was moving into a Latin American type of racial democracy. We're beyond race. We don't see color. I'm like, really? Okay. And I call it colorblind racism, and it is imperative we understand the nature of this new beast as the crass and direct Jim Crow prejudice and racial language of the past are no longer our primary ideological enemies. Albeit occasionally we, people of color, have to contend with fools who say some straight racist stuff. Our enemy nowadays is more refined and therefore, in my view, much, much more dangerous. By colorblind racism, I mean the dominant racial ideology anchored on the abstract extension of the principles of liberalism to racial matters that furnishes apparently non-racial explanations for all sorts of race-related matters. Hence, nowadays, if whites want to justify segregated schools, they say things such as, schools are about choice. No one should be forced to attend a school or be driven 1 hour to achieve some quota. Besides, folks should send their kids to neighborhood schools. And because neighborhoods are segregated, supporting neighborhood schools is supporting segregation in schools in a clever way, yeah? If they wish to oppose affirmative action, which actually is a band, if you want to really deal with racial inequality, we need to deal with reparations, yeah? It's a bigger investment. So affirmative action, I defend affirmative action, but affirmative action is a small investment. But even that small investment is viewed now as reverse discrimination. So therefore, folks say things such as, I'm all for equal opportunity. That is why I oppose affirmative action, because affirmative action is reverse discrimination. Say what? Okay, that is not a subliminal message. But I'm black and Puerto Rican. I have a kid who keeps, Papi, I need money, so. So in my book, I deconstruct each component part of this ideology and explain how to battle against each element of this ruling dogma. But here, I will just give you an example of one of the frames and not mention the stylistic components or the racial stories associated with this ideology. For more, that's it. Thank you. The central frames of this ideology are minimization of racism, cultural racism, naturalization, and abstract liberalism. So I will only illustrate the abstract liberalism frame, which is the backbone of this ideology. This frame incorporates tenets associated with the notion of liberalism in an abstract and decontextualized manner. By framing race matters in the language of liberalism, whites can appear reasonable, even moral, while opposing all practical approaches to deal with de facto racial inequality. For instance, Jim, a 30-year-old computer software salesperson, explained his opposition to affirmative action as follows. I think it's unfair top to bottom on everybody and the whole process. It often, discrimination itself is a bad word, right? But you discriminate every day. You want to buy a beer at the store, and there are 6 kinds of beers you can get from Natural Light to Sam Adams, right? And you look at the price, and you look at the kind of beer, and it's a choice. And a lot of what you have laid out in front of you, which one you get? Now, should the government sponsor Sam Adams and make it cheaper than Natural Light because it's brewed by someone in Boston? That doesn't make much sense, right? Why would we want that or make Sam Adams 8 times as expensive because we want people to buy Natural Light? So I see the faces. I do this for my business. So I can tell you that this is the language of contemporary racial transactions in public venues. Privately, after 2 beers, I think they change. But publicly, this is the way we talk. And I'm assuming many of you are like, so what does that have to do with race? That's what I'm here for. Since Jim assumes hiring decisions are like market choices, choosing between competing brands of beer, he embraces a laissez-faire position on hiring. Hire the best qualified, yeah? Or admitting Duke, the most qualified person, yeah? The problem with Jim's view, a view shared by most whites, is that labor market discrimination is alive and well and affects Black and Latino job applicants 30 to 50% of the time. Furthermore, although Jim believes, as do most whites, that jobs in America are awarded in meritocratic fashion, that supposedly the best qualified get the jobs, and as a professor, having George Bush as president was really good because it allowed me to give an example of the lack of a meritocratic regime in America. Okay, so anyway, so we presumably have a meritocratic system, but in truth, researchers have documented that most jobs are obtained through informal networks. How many? How much the informal networks matter? Anywhere between 80 and 85% of the jobs are through connections. And this finding applies not only to good jobs, but even to presumably bad jobs. So there was a study done here, close, in Baltimore, where this ethnographer observed students they were studying to be plumbers and electricians. And she found that in that particular school, the best kid happened to be an African-American kid. He didn't get any job because all the jobs were controlled by white folks, and they would call the school and say, I want a person that I can work with. So, well, don't you want the most qualified? I want a person that I can work with. Message conveyed. Therefore, by upholding a strict laissez-faire view on hiring, hire the most qualified, while ignoring the significant impact of discrimination in the labor market, Jim can safely voice his opposition to affirmative action in an apparently race-neutral way. Okay, now I'm going to get in trouble. Now I address the point that may anger those of you here still drunk with the Obama Kool-Aid. Since 2008, most of us have not seen what has been in front of our noses. We have seen, well, before this, let me talk a personal thing. So for me, as a Black man from Puerto Rico, we in the Caribbean have had Black and mulatto men and a few women who have done us in. Therefore, for me, it was never about having a Black person in the White House. I wanted more the Black politics rather than the color, yeah? Anyway, so we have seen what we wanted and longed to see. Whites have seen confirmation of their belief that America is indeed a colorblind nation, and Blacks and other folks of color have seen in Obama the impossible dream come true. But there is a more fitting, historically accurate, and sociologically viable explanation for Obama's so-called miracle. One I advanced 6 months before he was elected. And I predicted, remember that he cannot be elected because, I predict he's going to get elected. But that is not the issue. The discussion should be what will be the meaning of his election. And we failed miserably, collectively, in making the analysis that he will get support, but the transaction is, we vote for you, but don't talk about race, don't do anything. Yeah? Okay, so this was my explanation. The fact that race matters in America in every aspect of our lives, yet we elected the black man as our president, is but an apparent contradiction. Obama, his campaign, and his success are the outcome of 40 years of racial transition from the Jim Crow to the new racism regime or the new face of white supremacy. In Obamerica, a term I coined, remember when everybody was creating terms with, okay, so I created the term too. In Obamerica, by which I mean Obama elected president without the backing of a social movement, yeah, racism has remained firmly in place, and even worse, and here comes a prediction, is becoming a more formidable obstacle as Obama's so-called post-racial stand and persona bolsters the racial regime. Therefore, my big point here is that Obama does not represent change we can believe in, but more of the same in the racial terrain. So what is Obama's connection to the new racism? An important component of the post-civil rights racial regime is the process of selecting and vetting minority politicians developed by Republican operators in the last 30 years. After the Democratic Party co-opted many old civil rights leaders, John Lewis, Andrew Young, and the like, and made them shadows of themselves, both parties forged a new kind of minority politician. Today's minority politician is electorally oriented, is not the product of social movements, joins the party of choice while in college, and moves quickly through the party ranks. The new minority politicians, unlike their predecessors, are not radicals talking about the revolution and uprooting systematic or systemic racism. If Republican, they are anti-minority conservatives, such as Bobby Jindal, the governor of Louisiana, Susana Martinez, the governor of New Mexico, or Nikki Haley, the governor of South Carolina. And if Democrat, they are post-racial leaders with center-to-center right politics, such as Harold Ford, Cory Booker, Adrian Fenty, and of course, Barack Obama. Not surprisingly, plutocrats love these minority politicians because whether Republican or Democrat, neither threatens the power structure of Americas. Obama's case is illustrative. By 1987, Obama had abandoned Saul Alinsky's ideas of the community organizer. Remember that he sold us this, I was a community organizer. Actually, he was a paid community organizer. And after a year or so, he's like, this is hard. And those of us who have been in movement organization, it is hard. But the harder that terrain is, the more effective it is in producing and effecting deep structural change. Anyway, so after 2 years of community organizing, he was already on his way out and dreaming of replacing a person he used to hate, Harold Washington. Some of you may remember he was a former mayor of Chicago, African-American who died in office. Yeah? So Obama was critical of him, oh, you're a sellout, etc. And then he's like, I want to be like senator. Maybe I can become even president. Yeah? His rise to power in the Democratic Party was therefore not a miracle, but predictable. In 2003, he was vetted by the party donors in a meeting sponsored by Vernon Jordan, another example of this new, he used to be a civil rights leader and then became a millionaire. Yeah. The big hunches were infatuated with Obama because of 3 reasons. First, because he was not a racial polarizer. Second, because he was not anti-business. And lastly, because he had a suave, Harvard-developed style. Remember his so articulate comments that came from Republicans as well as Democrats? In short, they love him because he was not Jesse Jackson. And what did Obama do to get elected? First, he worked with the mainstream of the Democratic Party, raised money the same way and from the same people as mainstream politicians. I remind you that during the campaign, we sort of got bamboozled. He raised more money from Wall Street than McCain. If anyone wants to know why, now we have books explaining why. McCain crazy. And McCain called people in Wall Street and cursed them. So therefore, They defended their class interests. They thought, okay, Obama is sort of, neoliberal, whatever, but we trust him. McCain, we don't know what he's going to do, therefore let's put the money on this fellow. Anyway, and lastly, he organized a messianic campaign that joined an undercurrent of actors with different interests. Lacking a social movement with a common agenda, I suggested his presidency would become problematic as we had no way of predicting the direction of his actions and, if necessary, of booting him out. That's what I put my focus on, social movement politics, yeah? And history has absolved me. I say that because in 2008, I was vilified, crucified, etc. You remember that moment where you could not say anything about Obama. I remember being in an audience, mostly of black folks, and I said, we should have serious concern with Obama because among other things, he's for the death penalty. And someone in the audience, that's a lie. Okay, check. Get your computer, check. Oh. Yeah, but he has a nuanced position, and like when you are dead, there is no nuance. Okay. Second, the policies Obama endorsed during the campaign, which he has not continued endorsing and acting now as president, were not truly radical and likely to accomplish the empty yet savvy slogan of his campaign, change. Obama had seriously problematic stance on health care, jobs, the housing meltdown, the financial crisis, immigration. You know, there are more deportations today than under George Bush. So Jorge Arbusto was deporting, 260,000? And Obama, 400,000 a year, yeah? Anyway, and also in terms of foreign policy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Third, Obama reached the level of success he did in large measure because he made a strategic, not tactical, but strategic move towards racelessness and adopted a post-racial persona and political stance. He distanced himself from most leaders of the civil rights movement, from his own good and now much maligned Reverend Wright, and Reverend Wright was right when he said racism is endemic in America. It's like, yes, he is right. And Obama said, well, I don't think it's endemic. I'm like, really? Let's talk. Okay. Anyway, I'm from anything or anyone who made him too black or too political. Obama, go back to the campaign, even for a little bit, distanced himself from his own wife. Remember when Michelle became the angry black woman? So the campaign, his handlers, removed her from view for a month and then reintroduced her to us in that show, The View. And then she talked about her clothing. Where do you buy your clothes? J. Crew. Oh my goodness, you are like me, but black. I now connect with you. And I don't want to be disrespectful, but let me tell you, I do believe personally that Michelle Obama is probably more talented than Obama. Yeah. And I say that because those of us who do this for a living know how hard it is. I wish I had a teleprompter. I would look perfect. Yeah? And she never uses a teleprompter. And gives great speeches, you know. And what is she doing in the White House? Raising freaking tomatoes and telling us to lose weight. I mean, she's taking the position of the First Lady backwards. And when he talked about race in that infamous Philadelphia speech, or more recently in his speech at Morehouse College, he has talked about race in the wrong way. In the Philadelphia speech, he claimed that both whites and non-whites had a legitimate claim in terms of racism, therefore legitimizing for whites the notion of reverse discrimination. And those of us who listen, we listen only to the other part. And you're like, yeah, he's on my side. I'm like, pay attention. In the Morehouse College speech, he chastised blacks, particularly young black men, for not working hard enough. He talked about no excuses and minimized the significance of racism in contemporary America. In short, he talked like a white man to this black audience. And someone will write a book explaining why we, people of color, have not slapped him back when he insults us. And we are like, it's okay, I hear you. I'm like, no, he's wrong. And if you close your eyes and listen to him and don't know he's a black man, you are like, that racist person. How can... But then you open your eyes, oh, it's Obama. Okay, he can do whatever. He's gold. Okay. Obama has continued his post-racial stand and persona as president. When asked in press conference about racism, which no longer happens, the press stopped even asking him, yeah? He answered by pointing out that he was dealing. So in the first press conference, this is like 2 weeks after he was elected, a reporter from the Chicago Sun-Times asked him, so you're the first African-American president, so what do you think is the state of race in the nation? And he said, I hear you. When someone tells you I hear you, they're not listening, okay? I hear you. But I'm dealing with deep and real problems and facing 2 wars. Therefore, making the assumption that race and racism are not deep and central problems in our nation. I submit to you that race and racism are central parts of our social compact and not in a positive way, and we need to deal with them. And in the infamous Gates incident, remember that Harvard professor, yeah? Where Obama was caught off guard and said, oh, the police acted stupidly. Actually, the police acted in a predictable manner. We, men of color, know that we are profiled left and right, yeah? Okay. So he moved from the police acted stupidly. 2 days later, when his handlers told him, got it, don't say anything about race, he said, I should have calibrated my words better. And by the end of the week, he's saying what? Let's have a beer summit. My friends, if the problem of race in America or in any part of the world could be settled with drinking beer, we in the U.S. and we in Puerto Rico would be like, beyond race because we consume a lot of beer. Okay, so how have my predictions on Obama fared now that he has been president for 5 years? Overall, I am on the money. Obama has followed U.S. imperial policies in Iraq, Iran, Pakistan, Afghanistan, etc., as well as in Latin America. And after a brief period of reversing Bush's so-called counter-terrorist policies, he has become Bush light, which I think is worse, yeah? Because you are hardcore, people are like, well, yeah, wait a minute. But when you are light, people are like, oh, it's a light beer, I can drink 3, So we still have Guantanamo open, we're still doing renditions, and Obama has increased exponentially, actually 5 times more than Bush, drone attacks all over the world. So we now have a high-tech imperial domination, yeah? Where you don't have to have troops, you just have these drones, etc. On the domestic front, his stimulus package did not target workers and folks of color, and has been, for the most part, a failure. His healthcare reform did not deal with the central issues at hand, controlling costs and trying to make the system universal or close to it. The financial reform bill he passed added a few things that are good, but did nothing to control Wall Street gambling and to downsize too big to fail. Do you know that banks today, 5 years after Obama, are bigger than they were before, which means that when the next MEX come, if we said too big to fail in 2008, we have to say really too big to fail, yeah, in 2000. And lastly, on the race front, Obama has done very little. His cabinet is whiter than Bush's and Clinton's. And by the way, let me be consistent. It's not necessary to have folks of color in a cabinet to have good race policies, yeah? But for me, obviously, symbols do matter. So in that sense, I would like to see some folks of color, yeah? Obama has avoided talking about race, and when pushed by circumstances, has done a lousy job, such as the case that I mentioned, the Skip Gates controversy. Some of you remember the Shirley Sherrod incident, remember? That black woman who was like, oh, she's a racist. And by the end of the news cycle, and they fired her. And then in like 24 hours, oops, sorry. And you know what that happened, yeah? Because Obama's people were concerned that Glenn Beck was going to do a number of them, and they didn't want to have all this. If you are concerned about Glenn Beck, you are in trouble. It's crazy, and you cannot control. You have to remove him from view and keep, trucking with your agenda and politics. And in the Trayvon Martin case, where he, in my view, controversial, but I'll say it, I think he failed to use the bully pulpit to talk about the issue at hand, racial profiling. That was a moment where he could have said, I want us to have a national conversation about race, and I'm really concerned about racial profiling. Had he said that before, when the verdict comes out, he would have been in a much stronger position to follow through. What did he do on the second round? Well, we have a justice system, and we have to, be cool and be nice and understand one another. And like, what the hell are you talking about? Don't you see that we are mad? What we needed from you is leadership. And the assumption, some of you have bought into that assumption. Well, he's the president of all of us. Really? Let me tell you how it works. All groups in America have pushed for their particular interests. Women do it, LGBT folks do it, etc., etc. And some of them have gotten from Obama. The LGBT community, for example, put pressure and told them, if you don't do this, we're not going to campaign for you and we're not going to raise money. And that explains his miraculous, I'm evolving on this issue. Like, really? It took you like 3 minutes, yeah? Okay. And we Latinos should be mad as hell at Obama. We are responsible for his victory as we took him over the hump in 2008. In the US, you know that it's not votes what matters. It's electoral votes. So therefore, you have to be strategic and know where are the states that I need to get. And the states that matter were 3. New Mexico, Colorado, and Nevada. And then we Latinos who, at the beginning of the discussion, were viewed as, oh, these Latinos are racist, they're not going to vote for him. And then we ended up voting for him and basically giving him the victory. Doesn't mean that we Latinos don't have issues, okay? So we can talk about that later. In 2012, even though he did not give us much in his first term, we actually increased our level of support for Obama. And what we have gotten so far from Obama? He appointed 2 Latinos in his cabinet, Ken Salazar as Secretary of the Interior and Hilda Solis as Secretary of Labor. Positions that in this particular moment had not been that important yet, but not a single one in a central position. He appointed Sonia Sotomayor, Puerto Rican. Many of my Puerto Rican fellows are like, yes, but they missed that the Wall Street Journal supported Sonia Sotomayor's appointment. You know why? Because 90% of the things transacted in the Supreme Court are not about social issues. It's about corporate law. And the Wall Street Journal checked her casework and it's like, okay, she's for rights of women, minorities. Let me see what about corporations. Oh, she's with us. So therefore, Wall Street Journal supported her. Obama has not targeted money to our communities or issues, and despite his criticism of Arizona's SB 1070 bill, Obama has not worked hard and spent political capital to pass an immigration reform. He has left Republicans such as Marco Rubio take the lead on this matter, which all but guarantees that if there is a bill, it will not be not all that. Accordingly, we have a black president who, like cheap chocolate ice cream, delivers the color, but not the all-important flavor. Let me now conclude by first outlining what I have said, and then suggesting what we can do to fight the new race regime we face. First, I suggested that systemic racism did not end in the 1960s, but became a more sophisticated, now you see it, now you don't, system of practice I label as the new racism. Second, I argued a new racial ideology is in town. I call it colorblind racism. And I claim this ideology is formidable, given its slippery and seemingly non-racial character. Yeah? In the past, we had no problem identifying sort of prejudicial views. Today, we have to contend with a prejudice that seems to be non-racial. Yeah? And lastly, I claim that Obama's election was predicated on America's racial history over the last 40 years. So what is to be done? In this peculiar moment in America where, like in Alice in Wonderland, nothing is what it seems. We have a black president and then we're going backwards, yeah? Black folks used to have 1/10 the net worth of whites. Now it's 1/20. Yeah? We, the people of color, and our allies, must wake up and get back to basics. We are indeed in a defining moment, as Obama has said, in a moment of racial retreat and reactionary politics, and need to revitalize and retool our politics and political organizations if we wish to survive it. We need specifically new social movements to inspire, unite, and raise the consciousness of our folks. Maybe the Trayvon Martin tragedy is a moment that, if we do right, can help us get there. But I'm pessimistic about the likelihood of that being the case. But we also need new organizations with new strategies to deal not with the enemies of the past, but with the new enemy we face. That is, with the new regime and its accompanied monster of colorblind nonsense. To do what we must do, we need to sum up the spirit of Malcolm X, who rightly taught us, we declare our right on this earth to be a human. By the way, this was viewed as radical. He's asking for the right to be viewed as a human being, yeah? To be a human being, to be respected as a human being, to be given the rights of a human being in this society, on this earth, in this day, which we intend to bring into existence by any means necessary. It is time for us to wake up. It is time for us to be more like Malcolm and less like Obama. It is time for us to make demands from the Obama administration and from the country at large. So it's not enough for us. We mobilize, but we have to begin saying, Obama, we supported you. We need you to do A, B, and C. It is time for us to realize that only by demanding what seems impossible to attain at this peculiar moment will we be able to get out of the rabbit hole de la madriguera we have been in since 2008. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. Certainly a hot topic, especially for this commission. I'm thinking not just the new racism, the new commission after this. But some very interesting ideas, very different from our last lecture, which was anthropological in approach. A lot of new ideas, housing apartheid, I suspect banking apartheid too, and it reminds me of one of the bits of evidence we've unearthed, that in the Caribbean, for example, where there's a black majority, studies show that black entrepreneurs also have more difficulty in obtaining loans from banks. So it's not just in America. Colorblind racism, racism without racists, and of course we heard a lot about Obama, but that wasn't our topic. So we open the floor now for discussion. We have a few minutes. Yes, Angela, is it? Marianne, okay. Oh, I'm thinking of Angela Davis. It just came to my head. Oh, that means you have to come up.
Oh, or, yeah.
So I'm Marian Douglas Ungaro. Buenas tardes. Gracias por la presentación. In the 1990s, I was the only black American working at the OAS. And I worked here on the Haitian situation, formerly under the International Human Rights Mission, the OAS side of the International Human Rights Mission. And the thing is that there's the ethnic issue, because both of my parents are black Americans. And it's gotten to be, you talk about going down the rabbit hole. It's like people wondering, well, who are you? What do you mean you're black American? As opposed to being black in the United States now, but your family's from someplace else. And that's not about being exclusionary, but the fact that we exist. If I come to Puerto Rico, I'm not from Loíza Aldea, and there are people from Loíza Aldea. There's Afro-Mexicans, and they're from different communities. I have a group that's on Facebook called Afro-Americas. My idea, and I've been working with Hilaire and the Special Rapporteur to organize some of our first meetings for us as Afro-descendants of the Americas, regardless of where we're from, multilingual, and where we start to talk about our common history, and then our specific experiences, and to get to know each other. You're the first person that I've heard from with the critique of Mr. Obama. And I had to, I didn't apologize, but I was vilified in 2008 before the election. And I've lived in Kenya. I've lived in Kenya. I worked in Bosnia, Croatia, Peru, Kosovo. I speak 5 languages. But I was born at Freedman's Hospital in Washington, D.C. My family was enslaved in North and South Carolina, Tennessee, Missouri, etc. And there's a lot of my history that I still don't know because people don't want us to know. And we need to help each other as Afro-descendants. In any case, my group, Afro-Americas, which Afro-descendants are welcome to join, we have almost 1,000 people now, almost 1,000 members. And to have a president who they say is the first black president, hi Richard, who just happens to have a white American mother and a father who came from Kenya, I feel deeply insulted at a psychological, a spiritual level to basically erase our existence when Congressman Mickey Leland, who was a leader in the United States Congress, black American from Texas, died in a plane crash in 1989 in Ethiopia. The slavery descendant carrying food to the Ethiopians. And then Ron Brown, Afro-descendant from the United States, black American, he dies in a plane crash in Croatia in 1996, was it, or 95? In Croatia. And then after that, Congresswoman Cynthia McKinney, the first black woman elected to U.S. Congress from the state of Georgia, she is in the Democratic Party, and she was a party leader. She was not just a member of the party, she was a party leader until they realized they couldn't move something back here and make words come out her mouth. And then suddenly she was vilified and publicly humiliated. She didn't die in any accident, thank God. But the public denigration of Cynthia McKinney to the point where, and the Democratic Party no longer supported her reelection. So I'm just pointing out certain things happened to black American leaders who were well known. And many of them now, you don't need to ask people about Mickey Leland. They don't even know who he was, etc. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that history has been sort of subsumed, yeah, because it's better to talk about the good old times. When Obama was running for office, he went and talked to leaders of the civil rights movement and told them, you are the Moses generation. I'm the Joshua generation. You guys move us 90% to equality. My job is to bring the last, which is like 90%. We're not even close to that number. Anyway, so that erasure of the history is important. The second point I wanted to make is that I'm glad. I seldom hear, honestly, I'm going to speak truth to power. Seldom hear African Americans having this larger view on blackness. There is a problem that we have, and I think that given that our issues are well systemic, we need to understand blackness as a project, as a constructed project of oppression and domination. And therefore, blackness is not owned by people who happen to be black in the US. So often I have to remind African Americans that if the issue is who owns blackness, we in the Americas have blackness 100, 150 years before, because arguably the first African in the US came in 1619, in Puerto Rico 1508. Advantage Puerto Rico. And secondly, I sort of educate folks about the fact that the mess we have in terms of race discourse, race analysis, and race politics in Latin America, watch out. We have had 100 more years of race transactions. I submit to you that what we have in Latin America may be what the US will have in the near future. And I have called that the Latin Americanization of race stratification. You will never be Latin America or the Caribbean, but you can have the colorblind nonsense, and now you have your black president, and maybe next election you have a white woman, and then it's like, wow, we are like, we are like Brazil. I'm like, well, actually, you don't want to be like Brazil, because blacks in Brazil are worse off than blacks in the US. And they're worse off not just objectively, but they're also wears off because the discursive space, the space to talk about race publicly in Brazil, Puerto Rico, Cuba, Mexico, etc., is extremely limited. So when I talk, I gave a version of this talk in Puerto Rico to a crowd of 10 people. And so all of the folks were talking about race in the U.S., and then one of them asked me, oh, by the way, so what do you think about race in Puerto Rico? I'm like, well, I learned about colorblind racism in Puerto Rico. Silence. So, and then they began with the arguments that some of you may find familiar. Eduardo, don't you think you are importing into Puerto Rico an American problem? I'm like, because we have had this problem for 100+ years, longer than the U.S. Next. Eduardo, don't you think you are dividing the nation because the issue in Puerto Rico is colonialism or capitalism? I'm like, I'm not. Thank you for giving me so much power to divide a nation. But the nation has been divided, and we're not going to deal with this division until we deal with it. It cannot be like, ¿cómo se dice? Ponerlo debajo de la alfombra. Sweep it under the rug. We are not going to sweep it under the rug. We have to make it open. Okay. Yes.
What strategies would you suggest? Okay. I'm sorry you don't have a roving mic today like last time.
Doris Grant Wisdom. Wonderful, wonderful. I'm a professor too, so I use your work.
Oh, thank you.
But what strategies would you suggest in terms of bringing the people of color together? Because I find a lot of us, as you said, acquiesce to this notion of post-racialism. So,
well, I'll give you my best optimistic view. So, on the one hand, the possibilities are that we, the people of color, potentially are becoming the majority in this country. And that potentially gives us power. The problem is that we assume that what is today will be in 50 years. And I already see divisions, yeah? Not only the so-called, Latinos are fighting with blacks. No, divisions among ourselves. So the people who we call Latinos in the U.S., an interesting socio-political construction, because it's a term that we use collectively for political negotiations, but I don't know Mexicans I'm Mexicano, I'm Puerto Rican, I'm Dominican, yeah. So the people that we call Latinos and some of the members of other groups, including blacks, are creating a space, an in-between space that I call honorary white status, yeah. So think about George Zimmerman, yeah. So George Zimmerman has a Peruvian mother and a white father, but he was elevated and treated by, just check all the Klan folks who were supporting him and sending money. Why would all these sort of bona fide, old-fashioned racist folks be supporting, if you allow me to use the racist language, a darky? Because they elevated him to this sort of honorary white status. So you are not us, but you are close, and your last name is Zimmerman, and your racial politics are like mine, so I like you, yeah? So I think that in the future, when we reach this number that supposedly in 2050, minorities are going to the majority, watch out, yeah? So it's never about the numbers, because race is always changing. And a lot of the people that today are black may not be in the future. These neo-mulattoes may become sort of white or white-like. And they struggle now. Think about this construction of, I am biracial or multiracial. There is only one species, Homo sapiens, yeah? What we have is this problem of racism and that the creation of these spaces that are oppressive spaces, yeah? But these folks have been for a while, and think about it, these folks could not make that claim 50 years ago. Because if you acknowledge any drop of black blood in the U.S., you are black, yeah? The opposite of Latin America, where in Latin America, white blood is powerful, yeah? In the U.S., white blood is not that powerful. It is black blood that stains you for life, yeah? But now, there is this space. I am multiracial, therefore I am something else. Don't call me anything, call me an American. So that is the tension. Will we move in this Latin American-like system in which folks, there is a segment, in-betweeners, the honorary whites, do a bulk of the keeping people in place, and then the other folks, the historical groups, blacks, etc., move increasingly in an individual logic of collective action, like Obama. Yeah, Obama is not telling us, folks, let's organize. Obama is telling us, no, go to college and, climb, follow the American tradition. Yeah. So Trayvon Martin, he's not telling us, be on the streets. Yeah. He's saying, no, just educate yourself. I'm like, really? But there is discrimination in the, anyway. So therefore, I'm in this pessimistic position because on the one hand, I see possibilities, but I also see problems. If you push me, what direction you think is likely, I think I'm on the pessimistic side. But at the same time, because I'm not just a professor, but I also am an advocate for social change and social justice, I cannot afford to be pessimistic. Therefore, my job is to tell folks. That's why every talk I give, I end up talking about the importance of social movements. It doesn't mean that I don't believe that you guys need to vote. It means that if you check the historical record, the fundamental transformations in the world on race, class, gender, etc., had not been the product of people, I'm mad, I'm going to vote. No? When you get mad, you burn the house down, and then all of a sudden people are like, okay, let's talk.
Any other final questions? Okay, we have quite a few. Okay, let's make them short, please, because we've gone a bit over our time. Thanks.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Gilberto Amaya, and I want to congratulate you by the way you talk about these issues, because one of our problems is that we are not very candid or open to discuss the race issue. It's something that we try to push under the rug, as you were saying earlier. But I wanted to hear your opinion on the area of this diversity within the black population. I, like you, believe that the people will make the changes. And in a way, we are divided. We see the African Americans, Afro-Caribbeans, Afro-Latinos, the Africans, and those blacks who come from the Middle East, for example, who check the white box. So if we're divided in that way, how can we, eventually make a change? Because the statistics in this country say that blacks are like 13%, I think. But they're only, but they're counting mostly the African American community and not the other blacks like us who live in this country. So I would like to hear your opinion.
What I'm going to do is I'm going to allow the questions and then allow Professor Bonilla to wrap up, okay?
Hello. My question actually is kind of related with his question, not on the point of seeing the African American community divided into different types of cultural social groups, but also the way in which those groups interact with the Latino community, at least in the U.S. I'm from Colombia, South America, but I lived in Baltimore for a year and a half, and I was a witness of discrimination from African Americans, right? And I felt the tensions. I was working at that moment in medical assistance and social security disability issues. So the cases I saw would evidence the tension between these two ethnic groups. So I'm wondering, which is your position on that? Is it possible to find avenues to work together towards this unification of power in this fight? Or do you think that the social problems that we face in our ethnic groups are just way too broad to actually bring a fight together? Thank you.
My name is Julio Guiti. I am Garifuna. I am Honduran. I am a U.S. citizen. And very often I have to identify myself as Garifuna, Honduran, Afro-Latino, Latino. So as a result of that, I see that to overcome all these divisions that we can foresee along the way is going to be extremely challenging. Because we have people pulling us in different directions, and unless we stay focused in in what we want to accomplish, we won't go that far. When it comes to looking at processes in the region, Afro-Latinos or blacks are behind. If you were in the position to build capacity to overcome all these challenges, what would you do? Because we live in a society where, you know, all these groups, the LGBT community, women's, among others, they have been able to get all these accomplishments based on their capacity to demand. So what will be the unifying agenda that you will highlight? Thank you.
Three questions, and they're related. Let me see if I can. Okay. Yeah. I know they're, okay. Give me one more, okay. This may be a different question.
Mi nombre es Nelson Escobar, soy colombiano, vivo en Baltimore también. Simplemente es un comentario reconociendo indudablemente la tristeza de la historia en lo que tiene que ver con la diferencia de clases y de razas. A mí me preocupa mucho que los victimarios pasen a ser víctimas y las víctimas pasen a ser victimarios. Yo sueño con una sociedad donde las víctimas no se comporten como victimarios y los victimarios tampoco se comporten como víctimas. Es decir, cuando el pobre deja de ser pobre, que se acuerde del pobre. No que empiece justamente a discriminar por haber dejado su condición de tal. Y adicionalmente quisiera también comentar que me parece terrible, con toda la honestidad del caso, de que tengamos que darle, por ejemplo, un puesto a una mujer por el hecho de ser mujer, o a un homosexual por el hecho de ser homosexual, o al indio por el hecho de ser indio, o al blanco por el hecho de ser blanco. A mí eso me ofende particularmente. Creo que hay que darle la oportunidad a las personas por lo que son. La sangre es igual, la sangre es roja para el blanco, para el negro, para el azul, para el indio. Y tratar de alimentar la discriminación en cualquiera de sus formas me parece terrible. Muchas gracias por su exposición.
Okay. The first three questions, I think I can try to join them together. Can you hear me? Okay. So the first three questions, I think I can try to connect them. So it's basically the issue of the divisions in the larger black community and whether or not we can build capacity given these divisions. So obviously politics is the art of adding up. If you keep subtracting, you end up with zero, yeah? So but adding up and building coalitions has to be made and done not by hiding differences. Let me explain. So you notice that I refer to myself as a black Puerto Rican, yeah? Because I'm a black man from Puerto Rico, same as you are a black woman from the US, yeah? And we share on the racial oppression domain a lot, and we want the best for folks of color everywhere, yeah? At the same time, we do have differences, yeah? So I'm from Puerto Rico. I like salsa, arroz con habichuela, rice and beans, and we Puerto Ricans, we love pigs, and actually African Americans too. Maybe that is part of the universal experience of slavery, yeah, that we were given the nasty parts of the pig, and now we still are like eating all kinds of stuff that is not good for us, but 300 years of oppression, Anyway, so my point is that if we're going to develop a coalition politics, not only in terms of the black community expanded, yeah, to be inclusive, so that African Americans don't tell me you are not black. I'm like, really? Tell that to the police officers in the street, etc. So we need to do that, but we also need to deal in terms of minority groups in general, blacks, Latinos, blacks or not blacks, yeah? Asian Americans, etc. So I'm in the business of building a movement, a racial movement for justice and equality, and therefore that involves finding the commonality, but also respecting difference, respecting that there are going to be specificities peculiar to communities. So, for example, in North Carolina, the African American community made a terrible miscalculation of objecting to teaching English as a second language in schools. And that has created a situation where now the Latino community is like, oh, really? Okay. Wait till our demographic growth keeps growing, and then you're not going to be in a good position. So now there is an animosity. Now, I think that you got to understand those divisions and then work through them, yeah? Because we may have developed prejudice. Remember in my presentation I tried to make a distinction between prejudice and racism as a system of racial domination. So black folks can say, oh, I hate Latinos, blah, blah, blah. And Latinos can say, I hate Morenos. Because... But at the end of the day, we are more or less in the same social location, and we have commonalities, and it's easier to develop sort of coalition politics based on the common situation we face, and then from there say, we share the same stuff. Racial profiling is not just about African Americans, yeah? It's all about Latinos. It's about Asians, depending on the part of the country where you are at, yeah? So therefore, there are possibilities, yeah? So that is, in my view, what we need to do. Begin doing the politics of recognizing commonality and difference and moving forward. Now, the second question about victims and las víctimas y los victimarios, and the issue of not giving positions based on género, clase, or raza. I'm going to say it in English. I think that we have to be clear that we have not reached a position. So I do understand the question, but I have to sort of answer by telling you that I don't think we are in a position where the victims are victimizing the majority. If you think that we have a situation of reverse discrimination, I ask you to check the data in any of the countries, the US, Colombia, etc., on anything. Give me the indicator, yeah? Education, wealth, income, education, etc. And still, the advantage is white. Now, potentially, I do agree this, I want to move to a system of racial justice, not of racial injustice. So I would be equally opposed if, let's say, remember that there was a movement of Afrocentricity, yeah? You remember the Afrocentric movement? I actually oppose that movement because although I understood that when people are calling you ugly, you fight back by saying, no, I'm beautiful, and you're... But at the end of the day, I thought it was a first level of interaction, and we needed to go beyond that because you also don't want to be in a position where you say, if you're white, you're condemned to, you are an evil for life, yeah? If race is a construction and we're all Homo sapiens, ultimately the goal is to have a real racial democracy, yeah? Where race becomes, in my view, now let me talk about utopia, where race becomes sort of benign ethnicity. We may maintain some cultural stuff, but if race as oppression disappears, our social transaction will be plural. So your kids will be mixing with everybody because race would not be oppression. Anyway, but that is plural. The second component was whether or not we should basically give positions, yeah, based on gender and reserve positions based on race or gender or sexual orientation. And the alternative to that is what the societies dealing with homophobia, sexism, and racism have not done, which is to develop a truly plural system where race, gender, and sexual orientation do not determine life chances. Unfortunately, since we're not there, I think that in the short term, we need that. Because if not, guess what will happen? We will not have folks of color in any position. I mean, I'm going to tell you this. I know that for the Duke University, I am their affirmative action baby. Now, I don't give a damn they believe that. I think I'm better than them. I'm a proud black Puerto Rican man. I happen to have my PhD from Wisconsin, the top department, and my publication record is as good or better than that of my colleagues. But whiteness also gives the sense that, I'm white, I'm right forever, yeah? And you are black, oh, you got this because of our... You know how many times I have been told, your salary is so high. I think that's because you're black and Latino. And if you were gay, you would really make a lot of money. Yeah? my answer is, as a sociologist, you want to check the data? And then no more jokes. Then I'm like, let's check the data. The issue is never what the exception makes. It is the rule. What is the average salary of a minority professor compared to a white professor? Advantage white. What is the salary of a male professor compared to a female professor? And I'm talking here controlling for records. So I'm not saying pay women based on, okay, you're a woman, so no. With similar records, and still the difference is, like in the labor market, women make same qualifications, about 77% as much as men. So that is the situation we face. So huh? Oh, slightly worse than, now women, that's a big discussion, because the gender effect is as strong, if not stronger, than the race effect. So both women get less money than all men. That is why, in terms of us developing a progressive agenda of race, class, gender, sexual orientation, it will require, you talk about building coalitions, that larger coalition for not just racial justice, but social justice, for human justice, that larger coalition will be a real, let me use a Puerto Rican expression, embeleco, a real hard to connect thing. It's like what is that ice cream that I like? There's an ice cream that has all kinds of flavors together. Chunky monkey. So putting together that coalition of race, class, gender, sexual orientation is like creating the perfect chunky monkey ice cream. It is hard to do, but it tastes so good.
Okay, thank you. Well, actually, and some of those economic issues are in fact well documented in our report. You should read the report and the similar issues for reports on gender, the comparative and the persistent poverty. All that's left now is for our Executive Secretary, Honorable Emilio Alvarez, to give us the vote of thanks.
Thank you very much. Just we know we are on time. Thank you, Professor Eduardo Bonilla Silva, and also all of you to take the time to think about it, talk about it, reflection, and the rapporteurship. Just a quick note about my experience in the United States. I have just 10 months here, and from Mexico. And my oldest daughter went to the high school. I live in Arlington, Virginia. And she's a good student, and she get good notes. So the principal decided to organize a breakfast to honor those who get good grades. And then she came to the ceremony. They came early, my wife and my daughter. I was out of mission. And there were some tables. And my wife and my girl sit down together. And she put her back on the seat. And my wife asked Guadalupe to take it out because somebody else will come. And then people start coming, and nobody sits with them. And there were different tables around. At the end of the ceremony, there were people stand up. And Guadalupe and my wife, they were alone in the table because they were the only Latinos in the ceremony. And Guadalupe has not trouble about the identity, and she has no option. She's Guadalupe Alvarez y Casa Pastor. And then the principal came trying to say the name. Guadalupe Alvarez y Casa Pastor. No, he even couldn't pronounce the name, as I have troubles with English. No, she was the only Latino at the ceremony. And they stay all the time alone. No? That's the kind of, no? And when my wife asked, and she talked about the principal, said, well, he's not guilty of the school. No, that's not a question. That's the kind of practice. And we are talking in an area where Obama wants in Virginia the highest rates of Democrats. No? And after those experiences, Guadalupe decides to go back to Mexico to keep studying in Mexico because she didn't feel it comfortable. She suffered some experiences, and she decides to go back. She says, it's good for you, it is your plan, but this is not my plan. I want to go back. That kind of experiences is the new racism that we are having, living, and facing. And because of that, I think we have to keep talking, facing, thinking about it, how to change the situation. And just, we use these opportunities to insist in this report. The Commission presented, the Rapporteurship working on this, the situation of people of African descent in the Americas. There are different considerations. At the end, you will find 26 recommendations. This Rapporteurship has been working on that. And I just want to remark 3 or some ideas that the Rapporteurship is working and maybe could be useful because there are some people that come from embassies, not only based on the focus of this lecture of series, making visible the invisible. That's the idea, trying to organize the discussions. During this year we're going to organize this in Washington, D.C., but we are planning to do outside, in the countryside, in some different countries, member states. So we are quite open in Europe or some other places or some other countries. If civil society organizations, even states members would like to join to this initiative, it could be very good. We are also working in capacity building, training organizations, following their recommendations. The Rapporteurship could assist technical talking in some other issues. We are working some documentation and thematic reports about justice, about equality, about some thematic studies in some areas, and some other principles related to what do we need, for example, how do we address the best practices against discrimination in the Americas. So those are some of the topics that the Rapporteurship is working with. And I just want to mention this chance to working together, as we are doing now. And of course, we have a lot of things to do. But the question is, how do we face this structural discrimination? And I really think so that we need to do something about it. Because if we just wait, nothing will help us. Because the public policy, even the law, reproduces the discrimination. And we have to be really, tenemos que estar conscientes, we have to be conscious about this. So it's not a normal process, which is not normally discrimination. We have to fight against that. And that's the reason why we are organizing. Thank you very much, Professor Bonilla. We're really glad that you have the time to be here. And please join me to recognize Professor Bonilla. And thank you, all of you, commissioners, Commissioner Valentin, thank you very much, and all of you to take the time to still thinking, working, and fighting together. Thank you very much.